sharing stories of faith, hope, and inspiration. This is the Sunday Blessings Podcast.
Thank you for joining me for the Sunday Blessings Podcast today. I'm Jay Hildebrandt. When we think of pioneers, we often imagine wagon trains and handcarts bound for Utah. However, Idaho had its own pioneers who settled in this region. Becky Freeman, a volunteer at the Family Search Center in Idaho Falls, has dedicated time to studying these early Idaho pioneers and shares their stories with us.
Well, one of my favorite stories is Rebecca Mitchell. Now, she was a school teacher. She was from Illinois. She had a young daughter. She decided that she wanted to become a missionary for the Baptist Church. She went to some training, and she wanted to go. They wouldn't let her go because she had a daughter. She said, if I pay my way, can I do it? And they said, yeah, that's okay. So she sold everything she owned so she could get enough money to bring her and her daughter out. They went to Ogden, and from there they had to get a train. They heard that there was a place called Bellevue, Idaho, over near the Boise area that was really wild. They really needed some religion. So that was her goal. She got as far as Blackfoot, where she was going to get a stagecoach ticket to get to Bellevue, but she didn't have enough money. And so somebody else said, well, you don't have to go that far. There's a really wild town just a few miles north. And so that's how she ended up in Eagle Rock. She showed up on June 6th, 1882, to this rough, dirty town full of saloons and gambling halls, no churches, no schools. The very first Sunday, she got a shack, just a rumble-down shack shanty, invited people over and taught the first Sunday school lesson. And that was the first permanent Sunday school in all of southern Idaho. The next day, she started a school. She invited people to school. Now, by this time, she is completely out of money. She has no money whatsoever to even live on, let alone try and run a school. But a gentleman showed up that had a couple of children he wanted to put in her school, and he was willing to pay in advance for her to take his children to school. And he did, and that was enough money for her to be able to live until the end of the semester when everybody else paid. And she said that was provincial. That was the inspiration coming from the Lord that helped him to do that. And so she called it her province school. And that school continued. She later merged that school with working with Dick Chamberlain and Robert Anderson to create the first permanent school in Eagle Rock, which now is part of the Bonneville County School District 93.
Some other people there, I understand there's a Ryrie family that had some faith-promoting experiences?
Well, the Ryrie family, of course, settled up in the Ryrie area. And Mrs. Ryrie was a Lovell. She was from the Lovell family. They had lived down in Utah, and the church had kind of been advertising that there was some good lands and opportunities up in what they called Salt River, which is now the Star Valley area. They moved up there with a large family for a while, and things were really not good at all. It was really a rough period of time. And finally, they decided to abandon the settlement, and they moved. They were heading back down. They were going to go to Utah, but they needed to get to Eagle Rock, where they'd get a train that would take them on down to Utah. They made it as far as what is the Shelton Ryrie area now, which there was nothing. There was no settlement. There was nothing there. It was just sagebrush. And they stayed one night, camped one night. They got up in the morning, and there had been a snowstorm all night, and it blocked all the roads. They were stuck. There was one gentleman, David Ryrie, who was living there. He had just a one-room log cabin, and he was using it as a chicken coop. And he volunteered to let them stay there because they had to stay the winter until spring came. And by the time that they had stayed for the spring, they decided they liked it well enough to stay and make it their permanent home. David did marry their daughter, Leah Ann, and that's how the families get tied together. But that's how they came and settled in this area, and we're so glad they did.
And that's how Ryrie got its name,
Mm-hmm.
huh? That's interesting. Any other pioneer faith-promoting stories?
Kate and her husband, Bowen Curley, came to this area in the late 1890s. And again, this town was just sagebrush, dirt, dust, animals in the street, everything. It was just a horrible place. And she was not very happy with it, to be honest, and felt there was a need to change. And so she got some of the ladies organized and created what they called the Village Improvement Society. And their goal was to beautify the area and make it more family friendly. So they, the first thing they did is get some, what they would call garbage cans, some boxes that they could put the garbage from the street in. And they said, heaven help anybody who tried to throw garbage in the street and not put them in those boxes, because they would get arrested and fined and even jailed. They really pushed it. They managed to get ordinance passed so the animals could be locked up, and so it became better. But one of the things they did is they got some property over on 10th Street. They planted some produce gardens, and for 4 years they would grow produce and sell it. They got enough money to organize 20,000, or to purchase 20,000 seedling trees from a nursery in the Mideast, had them shipped out, and planted them all around in what is now the numbered streets and the Ridge District. And so those areas now, are very, very green and fertile and pretty. And that was the beginning when they started that. And they felt that there was inspiration there in making it possible for them to do that, to make it a more beautiful place for families to live in than they have now.
Oh, that's wonderful. I hear they say the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. So,
yeah.
But this was how many years ago when they did this?
This was around just about 1900 when they did that. Yeah. And they've had some people check some of the trees, and they think that some of the trees in that area maybe are some of those original trees.
Wow.
At this time, we're not sure, but they think that that's probably what it is.
Can you give me one or two more stories of some of the pioneers or what it was like?
Oh, yeah, this area is just so full of so many interesting stories. And I'm sure you're familiar with the building of the bridge, the Taylor's Bridge. That was the very first. An interesting part of that story is when Matt Taylor decided to build his bridge, he had to get some logs that were 45 feet long. Now, the best place to get those was up by Spencer and DuBois. How'd you get 45-foot logs from Spencer here in a wagon? You can't really do it in a wagon. It's not practical. So they waited until the first snows came, and then they would just hook a team to a log and drag them over the snow to get them here. And so that's where they got their big logs to start building the bridge. Of course, they built the bridge, and then it washed out the first year because it wasn't high enough, so they had to rebuild it. And of course, and that was the beginning of, it wasn't the beginning of a settlement. There was no settlement. They had 3 buildings, had to do with the stage station that was sitting here, but there wasn't, any real what we would call a settlement until the railroad came. The railroad, of course, came in 1879. They built the railroad bridge that was able to get the railroad going on up to Montana. That still didn't bring settlement. It wasn't until the railroad decided to move their rail yards up here. They wanted to have a rail yard up in Idaho, so if they had to fix a train or something, they didn't have to send them all the way to Utah. And they had talked to several people, and everybody wanted to charge too much for the land. Well, Robert Anderson and his brother Jack Anderson had purchased a lot of land in this area around the bridge. So they went to the railroad and they said, listen, we will give you the right way through the town and 100 feet on either side to build your depots and whatever you need. And then we'll give you another 104 acres to build your railroads if you will bring them to this area. The railroad aren't dumb. To get free land, that was worth it. So they announced this was going to be their rail yard. And that's when the town started growing as the railroad people came in. And many people came to work on the railroad and to work on the building the bridge and also on the building the rail yards. People that we were familiar with, like Thomas Ricks and William Kiefer and John Poole, and people that we're familiar with the names. They established this area, and that's when it brought the area. The area actually started and became a town as we know it at that time. Now the railroads only stayed here for a few years. And then there was some problems, and they moved down to Montana. They thought this might be the ending of the town, but it wasn't. It wasn't, because several things. One, the resilience of the people. two, they had started the irrigation system. The Andersons had started the irrigation system, and all of a sudden it became a rich, fertile land for agriculture. And another thing that was significant was tourism to Yellowstone Park. It brought tourism up there, which brought business. And so even though the railroad took a lot of the population, a lot of the businesses, the town did not die off. It was able to keep moving and growing. So we're thankful for those things that happened that made it possible for us to have a town here today.
Tell me about the wagon box prophecy.
Okay, well, this is important to me because my great-grandfather was working in Salt Lake for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a wagon master. And when they were going to come up, Wilford Woodruff and some other leaders of the church wanted to come up and see how this area was doing.
What
this
year
was
was
this was 1884.
Mm-hmm.
And the first settlement had been in 1882, coming mostly with the railroad, but many other people coming up to work agriculture and whatever. And they wanted to see it. So they came. So they asked my great-grandfather to come up as a wagon master, to bring one of the wagons. It was a large group, but there were several wagons. Mm-hmm. And so he came up, so he was there. They had a conference over on Sand Creek, and the people were really discouraged. I mean, they were ready to go home.
And this was in the Iona area.
Yeah, it's pretty close. It's there off of Telford Road. Is where it's located. They were ready to go home. It was too cold. Things didn't grow well. There was too much wind, too much dust. So, but he pulled up the wagon, and any wagon. I don't know if it was my great-grandfather's, but we like to pretend it was. And he's kind of set up a place up there where he could stand up so everybody could hear him. And he said, I foresee this is going to be a beautiful place. And he talked about schools of higher learning. He said he saw temples, he saw green valleys, he saw crops growing, flowers and trees. And he could see that it was a beautiful area. And he blessed the land that it would be fruitful and multiply, and that it would be a place where the people could live here. And so they decided to stay. My great-grandfather went home, got his family, and moved back up. A lot of other people did as they heard that. They felt that would be a good place. And that is one of the reasons why this area is so fertile. One little interesting thing, the insects, mosquitoes in this area were horrible. It was really bad. But after that prophecy, the wind started. And our Idaho winds, we get tired of them, but it's helped what keeps the insects down and made it possible for them to live. It was a blessing that came as a part of his prophecy and his blessing of the land. And then also immediately after that's when they started the irrigation systems. And so the land then could be used and multiplied and become very productive agricultural land.
And did the climate also moderate?
Yes, the climate moderated. It eased up so they could the growing season became a little longer so they could grow things. And so, yes, his blessing the land really made a difference in getting this area to grow.
And as I recall from the wagon box prophecy, what I've seen, he also talked about temples, plural.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, it was he said temples. And of course, for many years, we only had the Idaho Falls temple. But when they first announced the next temple, which is in Rexburg, everybody who had heard that prophecy goes, temples, yep. And of course, now there are multiple temples in the area that was something he presented. And institutions of higher learning, he talked about. And we thought, but now when you stop and think what we have in our area within a 50-mile radius of, ISU, BYU, Idaho, the College of Southern Idaho, there are many institutions in this area that people can get an education, which would seem impossible in that day and age. Yeah.
So do you see a hand of providence over Idaho when you think back on these stories and how far things have progressed here?
Oh, definitely. I have seen so much of that. I think this was a blessed area, and it was selected, and that the people who came were people who wanted to make it a success, whether they were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or the other pioneers who came. They wanted to make this because they could see the value in this area. And of course, now we look back on it and we see such a beautiful, fertile area. We see, how the city is growing, the businesses, the things that are happening, and what a blessed area it is to be in. And we know it was those early pioneers that established it. When they look back at what they had to do to make this possible, we really appreciate those. And we feel it's blessed because of it.
Thank you, Becky. We've been talking with Becky Freeman, a volunteer at the Family Search Center in Idaho Falls. She's dedicated time to studying these early Idaho pioneers and loves sharing her stories about them. Also, just for your information, the Family Search Center on Elva in Idaho Falls is open to the public with a multitude of free services. They can help you find your own family history and genealogy with some amazing resources. Also, if you want to digitize and preserve old family pictures or video or audio recordings on tape, those can be digitized with equipment there as well. It's all free and open to the public. If you want to find out more, you can just search on your search engine, Idaho Falls Family Search Center, and you'll find the way to get information on that. This has been the Sunday Blessings Podcast. I'm Jay Hildebrandt. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to the Sunday Blessings Podcast. If you enjoy the show, please share, subscribe, and rate the podcast. Sunday Blessings is hosted by Jay Hildebrandt and is a production of Riverbend Media Group. For more information or to contact the show, visit riverbendmediagroup.com.